Imagine you are standing in Africa, hundreds of thousands of years ago. There are animals everywhere. Some can solve problems. Some can use tools. Some can communicate. Some can even recognize themselves in a mirror. A chimpanzee can use a stick to pull termites from a nest. Crows can bend wire into hooks. Elephants mourn their dead. Whales pass songs from one generation to another. So here's the uncomfortable question. What exactly made us different? Because if using tools wasn't enough, and intelligence wasn't enough, and emotions weren't enough, then what was it? What happened inside the human story that eventually allowed one animal to build cities, invent gods, land on the moon, split the atom, and create this video? Most people imagine there must have been a single breakthrough, a moment. A day when an ancient human suddenly looked around and became something more. Maybe it was the first word, maybe the first fire, maybe the first tool, maybe the first time someone buried the dead. But the deeper you look into the evidence, the stranger the story becomes. Because some of the things we thought made humans uniquely human were not unique to us. And one of the strongest answers may be hiding in something we cannot find in any fossil. Not a bone, not a weapon, not a painting. Something far more powerful. The moment knowledge stopped dying with the person who discovered it. And if that's true, then the day humans became different from every other animal may not have been the day someone invented something. It may have been the day someone said, "Watch me. Do it like this." For a long time, the story seemed simple. Humans evolved bigger brains. Bigger brains made better tools. Better tools made us smarter. Then came language, art, religion, and civilization. Nice story. Easy to remember, but probably too simple. Because archaeology keeps ruining it, again and again. We discover that other human species made sophisticated tools. Neanderthals planned complex activities. Different homo groups may have buried their dead. Pigments that once looked like obvious religious symbols may have had practical purposes. And some of our ancient relatives may have been much more socially complex than we ever expected. So the question changes. Maybe humans did not become different because we were the first to be intelligent. Maybe we became different because of what we did with intelligence. We're going to follow several possible turning points. A fire that may have required people to think about tomorrow. A stone tool that may have existed in someone's mind before it existed in the world. Ancient burials that force us to ask a disturbing question. How do archaeologists know what a dead person meant to the people around them? And finally, a possibility that changes the entire story. What if humanity's greatest evolutionary breakthrough was not a smarter individual? What if it was the ability to make one mind permanently change another? And the most surprising part? Recent evidence suggests that even the behaviors we call human may not have appeared inside one species, in one place, all at once. So forget the simple story. Let's go back to a world where humans were not alone. Before we can ask what made humans different, we have to remove one of the biggest assumptions, that animals are unintelligent. They aren't. A chimpanzee watching another chimp use a tool can learn. Crows can solve multi-step problems. Dolphins can learn behaviors from each other. Elephants have shown behavior around dead members of their species that many people interpret as grief or mourning. And this matters because it destroys the easiest answer. We cannot simply say, humans became different when they became intelligent. Different from what? Intelligence is not a light switch. It doesn't suddenly turn on. And evolution rarely works like a movie transformation scene. There was no prehistoric morning where every ape was asleep and one individual woke up as Albert Einstein. Instead, abilities accumulate. Memory improves. Planning becomes deeper. Communication becomes richer. Cooperation becomes more organized. But here's where things get interesting. A species can have a brilliant individual and still never build civilization. Think about it. Imagine an ancient individual accidentally discovers a better way to make a cutting tool. Maybe everyone around him watches. Maybe a few copy it. But what happens when he dies? If nobody can reliably preserve the exact method, the knowledge can disappear. The invention dies with the inventor. And that may be one of the most important differences in the entire history of life. Not intelligence, accumulated intelligence. Not merely knowing something, making sure the next generation knows it too. Because once information can move from one mind to another with enough accuracy, something strange begins to happen. Generation 1 discovers something. Generation 2 doesn't have to start from zero. Generation 3 improves it. Generation 4 combines it with another idea, and suddenly, evolution is no longer happening only inside genes. It's happening inside culture. And culture can move much faster. A genetic mutation might take thousands of generations to spread, but an idea? An idea can spread through a group in days. So maybe the most important question isn't, when did humans become smart? Maybe it's, when did humans become capable of standing on the minds of the dead? Because every civilization does exactly that. You don't personally discover mathematics from scratch. You inherit it. You don't rediscover fire. You inherit the knowledge. You don't invent language alone. You are born into something that already existed before you. You are surrounded by dead people's ideas, and you don't even notice. Right now, the words you understand, the numbers you use, the technology in your hand, almost none of it was invented by you. That's not an insult. That's the secret. Humans became powerful because we learned how to inherit intelligence. But before we get to that final answer, we have to investigate the evidence. Because our ancient relatives were already doing things that look surprisingly close to us. And one of the most famous examples of human spirituality might have been created by a rodent. Yes, a rodent. In the mountains of Iraqi, Kurdistan is Shanidar Cave. And for decades, it gave the world one of the most emotional stories about Neanderthals. A Neanderthal skeleton was found with large amounts of pollen associated with the burial area. The interpretation became famous. Maybe someone had placed flowers around the dead body. Imagine what that would mean. Tens of thousands of years ago, another kind of human stands beside a dead companion. Someone gathers flowers, places them near the body, and perhaps feels something beyond immediate survival. Grief, memory, maybe ritual. The image was powerful, so powerful that it became part of popular culture. The flower burial helped change how people imagined Neanderthals, no longer stupid brutes. Maybe they cared for their dead. Maybe they had symbolic behavior. Maybe something we might call spirituality. But then came the problem. What if the flowers weren't placed there by humans at all? An alternative explanation argued that burrowing animals, including rodents that collected plant material, could have been responsible for moving pollen into the cave sediments. And suddenly, archaeology teaches us an important lesson. The past does not speak. We interpret it. A skeleton cannot tell you, I was buried intentionally. Pollen cannot tell you, these flowers were placed here as part of a ritual. Archaeologists have to reconstruct invisible behavior from physical traces. And sometimes, two explanations can fit the same evidence. This doesn't mean the flower burial story is definitely false. It means the certainty often presented in documentaries is too strong. And this problem goes much deeper. Take ancient burials themselves. For us, burial feels obviously meaningful. When we see a body carefully positioned underground, we naturally imagine intention. But how do you prove intention after tens of thousands of years? Could natural processes move bones? Could a body fall into a depression? Could sediment gradually cover it? Could later disturbances change the evidence? At different sites, researchers have debated these questions intensely. And then something fascinating happened. New discoveries did not simply answer the old question. They made it bigger. Because the evidence began suggesting that behaviors such as burial and pigment use may have existed across multiple human groups, not just one. Which brings us to Israel, and a cave that challenges the idea that one species suddenly became the real humans. In 2025, researchers published a study about Tinshemet Cave in Israel. The dates involved are extraordinary. The relevant period stretches roughly from 130,000 to 80,000 years ago. Around 100,000 years ago, Tinshemet Cave contained human remains associated with stone tools, animal remains, and abundant ochre. But the bigger discovery wasn't just what was inside one cave. It was the pattern that appeared when researchers compared Tinshemet with other sites in the region. The Levant at that time was not occupied by one neat, uniform population. There were anatomically diverse Homo groups, fossils with Homo sapiens-like traits, Neanderthal-like populations, and other groups whose exact relationships remained debated. Yet the researchers argued that across this region, there was evidence for a more uniform behavioral pattern. Similar technological traditions, large game hunting, and socially elaborate behaviors that included intentional burial and ochre use in burial contexts. Now, stop there. Because this is where the traditional story starts to crack. We often imagine evolution like a competition. One species is primitive, another becomes advanced, then the advanced one wins. But what if different human groups were interacting? Learning from one another? Sharing practices? Possibly mixing biologically as well as culturally? The Tinshemet study proposed that intensified interactions and admixture between Homo groups may have contributed to this behavioral uniformity. In other words, the behaviors we call human may not have been invented by one chosen group. They may have spread, and that's a much stranger story. Imagine several populations meeting across the ancient landscape. They don't all look identical. They may not all have exactly the same ancestry, but they exchange something. Techniques, behaviors, ways of treating the dead, ways of processing materials, and perhaps something even harder to see, ideas. So what if the first great human revolution wasn't one species became smarter than everyone else? What if it was different minds started influencing one another? That is a completely different origin story, and it gives us a clue about where we're heading. Because the moment information starts moving reliably between individuals, biology is no longer doing all the work. Culture begins to take over. But there was another technology that may have forced ancient humans to think beyond the present moment, and it glowed in the dark. Most of us hear the phrase, early humans controlled fire, and think warmth, cooking, protection from predators. End of story. But fire may tell us something much deeper about the mind, because using fire once is not the same as maintaining it. Imagine a small group, thousands or hundreds of thousands of years ago. They have a fire. Night comes. Someone needs to make sure it survives. Maybe fuel has to be gathered before it runs out. Maybe embers have to be protected. Maybe the group has to coordinate. Maybe somebody has to resist using all available fuel immediately because there is a future problem coming. Tomorrow. And that sounds simple to us because we live inside the future. We schedule things, save money, charge our phones overnight, prepare food for later. But future-directed behavior is cognitively demanding. Terence Twimmy, writing about the cognitive implications of controlled fire use, argued that accessing, maintaining, and benefiting from fire could imply abilities involving future planning, response inhibition, group-level cooperation, extended working memory, episodic memory, collective intentionality, and communication. That doesn't mean we can point to an ancient campfire and say, "Congratulations, consciousness has been discovered." But it gives us a fascinating possibility. The real breakthrough wasn't simply lighting a fire. It was changing behavior in the present because of a future that existed only inside the mind. Think about that. An animal is hungry. It eats. A human can be hungry and save food for later. An individual sees wood. It burns it. A group can see wood and calculate. Even without numbers, we need some now, but not all of it. The future becomes something you can act toward, something invisible that changes your behavior today. And perhaps this ability connected with another ancient technology, the stone hand axe. Because a hand axe is not merely a stone. To make one, you have to remove material step by step while maintaining some relationship with a final shape. You are not simply reacting to the stone. You are moving towards something that doesn't exist yet. You can imagine it, then create it. And that might sound obvious, but think about what that really means. Before the object exists in the world, it exists in some form inside a mind. And if another person can learn how to produce that same imagined object, then one mind has transferred a future possibility into another. Now we're getting close, very close, because the ability to imagine tomorrow is powerful. The ability to imagine an object is powerful, but neither is enough to build civilization. The truly explosive step happens when you can pass that imagined thing on, not just by accident, not just through vague imitation, but reliably, across generations. Here's a strange thought. What was the first human technology that could reproduce itself? Not a spear, not a fire, not a wheel, an idea. If I teach you how to make a tool, the physical tool may eventually break, but the knowledge can survive. You can make another. And if you teach someone else, the original object is gone. The original teacher might be dead, but the technique continues. This is where human beings may have crossed a threshold that changed everything. Researchers Francesco De Erico and William Banks have explored what they call the archaeology of teaching. And the phrase itself sounds impossible. How do you find teaching in archaeology? You can't excavate a lesson. You can't dig up an ancient classroom. There are no fossilized words saying, hold it like this. So researchers have to look indirectly at the complexity of technologies, at patterns suggesting how skills were learned, at the difference between simply copying a result and understanding a process. And the big idea is this: humans did not become extraordinary simply because someone somewhere was very smart. Other animals can learn socially. Other animals can imitate. But human culture appears capable of something called cumulative culture, the ratchet effect. Once a useful innovation enters the population, it doesn't necessarily disappear when the inventor dies. It can be retained, then improved, then retained again, like a ratchet that prevents a wheel from sliding backward. This changes everything. Imagine two groups. In Group A, one genius invents a better spear. He dies. The technique disappears. 100 years later, someone has to rediscover it. In Group B, someone invents a better spear. Another person learns the exact technique. A child learns it too. Then someone improves it. Now the group is no longer starting from zero. Knowledge is accumulating. And once that starts, progress can become explosive. Not instantly. This is important. For tens of thousands of years, cultural change can still appear slow. But the direction has changed. The group has created something bigger than any individual mind, a shared memory. And here's the part that gives me chills. You are using that shared memory right now. You can read because thousands of years of cultural evolution came before you. The language you're hearing was not invented by the narrator. The microphone was not invented by the editor. The internet was not invented by the viewer. Every modern human is powerful, partly because we are never truly alone inside our minds. We carry other people's discoveries, dead people's discoveries, people we will never meet, people who died before our grandparents were born. A single human being is intelligent, but a connected population can become something else entirely. And maybe that's when we became different. Not when one human became smarter than every animal, but when humans became able to connect intelligence across time. When a thought could survive its thinker. Let that sink in. An animal can leave behind bones. A human can leave behind instructions. And instructions can keep changing the world after the body is gone. That may be the real beginning of history, but there is still one problem. If teaching and cultural transmission are so important, when exactly did they begin? And the honest answer is, we don't know. There may never have been one day. Which means the title of this video may be hiding a trick. Maybe we're searching for a moment that never existed. And that realization leads to the biggest reveal of all. So, when did humans become different from every other animal? Was it when we first made tools? No. Other animals used tools. Was it when we became intelligent? Not enough. Other animals solved problems too. Was it fire? Fire may have transformed human cognition and social life, but it doesn't give us one clean moment where an ordinary animal suddenly became human. Was it burial? Maybe. But even the interpretation of ancient burials can be complicated. And some behaviors once presented as uniquely ours may have been shared by other Homo groups. Was it art? Religion? Language? We can argue about all of them. But perhaps the question itself is wrong. Maybe humans didn't wake up one morning and become different. Maybe there was no magical line. No single before, no single after. Instead, imagine thousands of small thresholds, a slightly better memory, a deeper ability to imagine the future, a more precise way of copying, a new method of teaching, a stronger social bond, a larger network, a tool improved by someone who never met its original inventor, then another improvement, then another, until something astonishing happens. A group of animals begins building a world that no individual animal could ever understand completely. That's what civilization is. No one person understands all of it. You don't know how to manufacture every component in your phone. You probably can't build a power station. You can't produce a computer chip from raw materials. You can't rediscover modern medicine alone. And yet, collectively, we can do all of it. Because human intelligence escaped the skull. It moved into other people. Into gestures, into language, into tools, into stories, into rituals, into books, and eventually into machines. That might be the most radical moment in our history, the day intelligence stopped being private. And remember the ancient humans in the Levant. Different populations, different bodies. but evidence suggesting increasingly shared behaviors. Maybe that's a clue. The important story wasn't one species standing alone above everyone else. It may have been connection, interaction, learning, ideas crossing boundaries. Because perhaps the first truly human superpower wasn't having the best brain. It was making brains work together, across a group, across generations, across thousands of years. And if that is true, then every time one ancient human taught another something, the boundary moved a little further. The teacher died, but the idea didn't. The student became a teacher. The knowledge survived, then changed, then survived again. And one day, after countless repetitions, here we are. Filming documentaries about the people who first learned how to remember each other. So let's return to the question we started with. What happened on the day humans became different from every other animal? Maybe nothing happened on one day. Maybe that is the answer. Maybe human uniqueness was not a switch. It was a chain reaction. One mind learned something, then another mind learned it too. Then someone improved it, and for the first time, perhaps, knowledge became stronger than the individual who created it. The inventor could die. The invention could survive. And once ideas could survive, they could evolve. Faster than bodies, faster than genes. And eventually, ideas started changing the planet itself. So perhaps humans became different, not when we made the first tool, but when we made sure the next person could make it better. Not when we first looked at the stars, but when we told someone else what we thought they meant. Not when one person had a brilliant idea, but when that idea refused to die. And here's the strangest part. That process is still happening, right now. Every book you read, every skill you learn, every video you watch, every technique you copy, you are participating in the same process. A mind changing another mind, across time, across distance, sometimes across thousands of years. So maybe the biggest difference between us and every other animal isn't that humans are simply more intelligent. Maybe it's this. We can inherit thoughts from people who are no longer alive and add our own before passing them forward. And maybe that's why, when you look at human history, it doesn't feel like the history of one animal. It feels like one enormous mind, slowly assembling itself. What do you think? If you had to choose just one thing that made humans truly different, language, imagination, teaching, cooperation, or something else, what would you choose? Tell me in the comments. And if you enjoy exploring the strange moments that made us human, subscribe. Because the deeper you go into our past, the less obvious it becomes who we really are.